So before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to explain why we felt this session was so important. So volunteers play a really vital role in all of our organisations. They give us their time, energy and skills to support community and causes. But as we're all aware, sometimes things don't go smoothly. Volunteers might have concerns or even complaints about how they're treated, perhaps what they've been asked to do or how issues have been handled. And when organisations have clear, thoughtful processes in place, it creates a safer, more trusting environment where people might feel able to speak up. But if those processes are unclear or overly formal or inconsistent, it can damage relationships, affect morale, and make your volunteers feel unheard. This isn't about avoiding problems, it's an opportunity. How we respond to concerns can really help strengthen our organisation, support inclusion, and help develop a culture of openness and learning. And that's what we're going to focus on today, how to handle these situations well in a way that supports both the volunteer and the organisation. So just to introduce myself, I'm Frankie and I'll be chairing today's session. And for those who find visual descriptions helpful, I'm a white woman with blonde hair and I'm wearing glasses and a green top. I'm also joined by my colleagues Amy and Chanel, who are helping behind the scenes with things like sharing the slides, running the polls, and keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A. So we're just going to have a quick look at how the session will be running this morning. Next slide, please. We're nearly through the welcome and housekeeping, and then I'm going to hand over to the people who you're really here to listen to, which are our speakers. NCVO Associate Victoria Dickinson, Catherine Haynes, Resolutions Manager from the Ramblers, and Steve Naylis, CEO from Bucks Vision. They'll be sharing their practical considerations and their lessons learned to help you handle volunteer concerns and complaints. By 11:30, we're going to be opening the floor for the questions. So please do feel free to drop your question into the Q&A box at any time, and we will try and cover as many as we can. We are conscious that there are a lot of people on the session today, so we might not get time to go through them all, but any that we don't get through, we will try and answer afterwards in the follow-up email. We are aiming to wrap up at 12 with some signposting to further support and resources, including training opportunities we've got coming up later in the year. So that's the plan, and we're really pleased to have you with us. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, for anyone who's unfamiliar with us, NCVO is the largest network for charities and volunteering. We're proud to represent and support over 17,000 voluntary organisations of all sizes, from the biggest household name charities to the smallest community groups. Our members range from big medical research charities to local amateur sports clubs. And at their heart, they all have the aim of making the world around them a better place. And we would love for you to join us if you aren't already a member. Next slide, please. So by becoming a member of NCVO, you can save time and money. As a member, you get access to information and guidance, downloadable tools and templates, discounted training, the sector's most encompassing research, and more. Only members have complete access to everything we have to offer. If you're a small charity with income under 30,000, then membership is free. You can find full details and join on our website, which is www.ncvo.org.uk, and then follow the link to join. Just before we get into the main content, next slide, please. We'd love to get a sense of where everyone's at in terms of handling your volunteer concerns and complaints. So we're just going to run a really quick poll to try and gauge your confidence levels currently. So you should see 4 options coming up on your screen now. Very confident in handling concerns and complaints, somewhat confident, not very confident at all, and not confident at all. So no confidence. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just a really useful way for us to see the range of experience in the room. So if you go ahead and pick the one that's closest to your current situation, and we'll be sharing the results in just a minute. Oh, so having a look, I think some of you are somewhat confident, which is good. That's good to see that you've got somewhat confident. Hopefully by the end of this session, that will have improved and we'll have more of you in that very confident section. Next slide, please. So now we're moving into the next part of today's session, which looks at the practical side of handling volunteer concerns and complaints. I'm really pleased to hand over to Victoria, who has a wealth of experience supporting organisations with good practice in volunteer management. Victoria is going to take us through some key considerations and approaches you can use when dealing with sensitive situations involving volunteers, helping you to think about what works best in your own context. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you, Frankie, for the introduction and inviting me to speak today on such an important topic, and one that can arise at any time in any volunteer programme. And then these concerns can arise between volunteers, it can arise between staff and volunteers, and also sometimes between staff, volunteers and the general public, if volunteers are actually working in public spaces. It's an area that we really need to take seriously and give time, investing our time into. And I hope today that you'll pick up some thoughts and ideas on how to create an environment where volunteers feel safe to have open conversations and how you can address them. And a description of myself is I'm a white woman with short brown hair, I'm wearing glasses, and I've got a pink costume. So next slide, please. So I just want to start with a reflection. I just want you to think for a moment about a time in your own life. It could be a workplace, it could be a community setting, or even a social setting when you needed to raise a concern. What made that experience positive, or maybe made that experience not positive, or maybe at least manageable? Was it the way the person really listened to you? Was it they reassured you that they would do something about it? Or simply that they showed you respect and can listen to your concern? For most people, the essentials are much the same. We're all looking for respect, clarity, and following up. And those are the foundations of feeling safe. And our volunteers need to have the same foundations. And when we've shown that concerns are welcomed, they're handled fairly and followed up on, volunteers feel safer and more motivated to stay engaged. Next slide, please. So why does this actually matter? Well, as we know, volunteers are not tied to us by contracts. They're not employees. They give their time freely to us. So that means they also can leave freely from their own choices. If they feel they've been ignored, they've been undervalued, or feeling unsafe, they may just walk away from your organisation. And once that trust is broken, it's really hard to win back. We also know from research that one of the top reasons volunteers leave is not for the cause. It's often how they feel treated, whether their voices have been heard. We all work really hard to recruit volunteers in this very difficult climate. When thinking about how much time we spend on recruiting volunteers, we should ensure that we invest that time in engaging and keeping our volunteers motivated whilst they're volunteering for us too. Also, with volunteers, there is unresolved concerns can have that rippled effect. Other volunteers notice that something's going on. They notice that there is a sort of odd feeling going on with the organisation. If they see that issues have just been brushed aside, pushed under the carpet, they may stop speaking up themselves. And that in turn leads to frustration, silence, and sometimes creates that rather toxic culture, something that none of us want to have in our volunteer programs. Also, there's a reputational risk. As we all know, volunteers are very well connected in their communities. They very often support more than one organisation as volunteers. They're very social and connected to local people. And if they've had a negative experience, they will quite happily share that experience with others. And in turn, that could affect the ability for you as an organisation to recruit. It could affect your fundraising. And also it could affect how you maintain your partnerships in that local area. Volunteers can be a great advocate for you. They can be the voice of your organisation. And making sure that they have positive, encouraging things to say about your organisation, as I said, helps with your recruitment as much as anything else. On the hand that we actually do listen and act well, then volunteers actually really become much more loyal to us and much more engaged. So basically, a complaint or an issue that's handled positively can actually strengthen your relationship with your volunteers. So feeling safe to speak up is essential. It's not an option for a healthy volunteer culture. Volunteers don't expect perfection. They know that nobody's perfect, and it's really important for us to be honest about how we're dealing with things. But they do really respect and expect to be heard. So responding well isn't just about damage control, it's an opportunity to build that trust and also reflect on your current practices. So when things do go wrong, reflecting about what happened and how you can change things sometimes is just as important too. Next slide, please. The three pillars of good practice. So I like to think of this in terms of these three key pillars. So the first one is about having an open culture, a culture of openness. And this is about the whole overall environment. Do your leaders or yourself model honesty and invite feedback? Do your volunteers feel encouraged to share ideas and concerns? For an example, during a meeting or when you start a meeting of any kind, do you actually ask, does anyone have any feedback or anything worrying them? Over time, if you're continuously using that terminology in those opening sentences, that begins to normalize people speaking up. It's really important to have clear pathways. Volunteers need to know how to raise a concern. Do you have simple guides in plain English? Are there multiple routes? And in case they don't feel comfortable with their direct contact person, do you offer alternatives? For example, an organisation could offer both a named person to contact or an anonymous feedback form too. That gives flexibility and ensure volunteers always have the opportunity to be heard. And the last pillar in this is consistent responses. Nothing undermines trust faster than inconsistencies. If one volunteer gets taken seriously and another one is brushed off, the whole process loses credibility. Consistency means every concern is acknowledged and followed through, regardless of who raised it and which team or area they're volunteering in. And when these three pillars are in place, openness, clear pathways, and consistent responses, volunteers feel confident their voices matter. So do you feel confident that you have those three pillars in place? Are there areas that you could improve on? Next slide, please. So setting the tone from the start. So that is creating that culture of openness. Induction is a really critical part of a volunteer's journey. It's when the volunteers first form an impression of your culture. They know a lot about your organisation, what you try to achieve, your aims, objectives. But also you're talking here about the impression that you're given about your whole culture. So if you're talking openly about feedback and concerns right at the beginning and their induction, you're actually signalling that raising an issue is normal and welcome. I want to give two examples of this. So one manager might say, it's an induction program, here's all our policies and here's our complaint policy if you need it. And they don't really go through it and don't explain anything in it at all. And that just feels very formal and it may actually be off-putting for a volunteer. But another manager may something like, we really value your feedback. And if you have any worries or concerns while you're volunteering for us here, we'd always like to hear from you. Please let us know. And we'll always take it seriously. And that might be an opportunity to give an overview about the policy rather than just giving a paper document to somebody. And that feels much more inviting and much more safe in when they're volunteering for you. So the words that we use and the reassurance we give to volunteers very early on can make all the difference whether a volunteer feels safe and able to speak up. Next slide, please. So the other pillar really refers about that clear and accessible processes. A process, a good one, is where people can actually use them. So this means that they need to be written in plain language and not have lots of legal jargon in them. And this is where we have to be clear between when a volunteer is a volunteer and not treating them like a paid member of staff. So ensure that it's plain language and no legal jargon. Ensure that it's easy to find. Very often we have these amazing documents that spend hours poring over and writing, and then actually they get buried somewhere. They could be buried deep in a handbook. They could be deep in a management system filing that all volunteers can access. It's more so important to offer more than one route. And some people actually prefer to have raised concerns and issues face to face, whilst others actually prefer to be private. And you might offer an anonymous option for this. Again, what's important to all this is consistency is vital. If one team deals with it quickly and another one ignores them, the whole system loses credibility. Volunteers should get the same response and respect wherever they are within the organisation. Next slide, please. Training and supporting leaders, enabling them to deal with issues and concerns as they arise, because leaders and volunteers are very often the first point of contact. So they need to feel confident in how to deal with it. So offering support and training. And some of the ways that you can consider to help and support leaders and volunteers, or even yourself in building up your own personal confidence, is understanding the difference between feedback and complaints. Because not everything is a grievance. Sometimes they're just feedback and things they'd like to share with you. But everything needs to be heard and deserves to be heard. And you need to model good responses. And that's about always thanking a volunteer and showing empathy and explaining the next steps. And last of all is ensuring that everybody who's managing and leading volunteers knows what the process is. They don't feel like they're making it up as they go along. So you have some robust and clear processes that are understandable for volunteer leader to implement. And without training, leaders and volunteers may unintentionally dismiss a concern by saying, don't worry about it. And they might be minimizing what volunteers saying to them. And without training, they may not know how to resolve the issue quickly and efficiently. Next slide, please. Not everyone will deal and raise a concern formally. Sometimes these are mentioned in conversations. They're hinted at sometimes also through a change of behaviour. You might notice a change of behaviour in a volunteer and consider what that might be about and ask them and approach them. Are they okay? Have they got any concerns? And that's why regular check-ins are important. This could be simply as just having a quick catch-up, a coffee. You could do that virtually or even on face-to-face where that's possible. You might decide a short anonymous survey might help, or a debrief after an event. And there's just simple questions. There's like, is anything worrying you? And this actually identifies issues early and then prevents that escalation. These are basically small and informal touches that build a sense of openness and show volunteers you care about their well-being. Next slide, please. Leaders of volunteers are very busy people. Our roles are really complex with having to deal with lots of things at the same time, and they tend to be like spinning plates. So you're juggling lots of things at one time. And when somebody comes up to you with a concern and complaint, it can take you off guard slightly, and you have to think, take a breath, and respond. So some of the words that we use in a moment can really matter. And here's some of the phrases that might help. Things like, thank you for telling me. That shows that you appreciate them telling you. I'll keep you updated. That shows you've got accountability. You're going to keep some actions forward. We'll look at this properly. It shows you're taking it seriously. The other hand, things to try and avoid are, don't worry, it's all good. It rather sounds rather dismissive. Or I've already said I'd deal with it. I find rather defensive. And then I'll get to that later. Again, that feels like it's delaying it. It feels like you're just kicking it into the long grass. So thinking about how you phrase these things when people approach you, volunteers want to know that they will be dealt with respect and urgency. So sometimes it's just practice to get those words in your space of thinking sometimes, sentences that become more familiar when people and volunteers approach you about a concern or issue. Next slide, please. So here's a straightforward 5-step process that works in most situations. Listen actively. Give volunteers space. Make eye contact with your volunteers. Avoid disruptions. Making sure you're not listening to a message on the phone, looking at emails. You may even take the opportunity to move away from a public place and have that conversation in a much private area so you can listen. Clarify the facts. Always summarize back what you heard. So what you're saying is, don't make assumptions. I'll put words into a volunteer's mouth. Just be clear and listen. Reassure them and explain what the next steps will be. So share a policy maybe at this point in time if you felt that would be helpful, but just go through what the steps would be. Recording appropriately. It is important to keep notes because we have, again, lots of things going on in our minds, and keeping a note of what's happened is important, but also for small issues as well, so that sometimes patterns emerge that you identify through lots of little things rather than one big thing. But making sure that it's confidential, that it's factual, and you inform the person that you are recording information about this concern or issue they may be having. And follow up with the volunteer. Circle right back. Even a resolution takes time, and silence feels that you're neglecting them. I think we all do feel rather frustrated when we've not heard anything back, when we make a complaint. So some structure like this does keep the process professional, consistent, and respectful. Next slide, please. Policies are a really good framework to help you with ensuring you have a safe place for volunteers in your organisation. As you are most probably aware, that volunteers have no legal rights as an employee because they are volunteers. And in fact, not many laws actually refer to volunteers. However, we do have a duty of care to support and look after our volunteers. And that's why we take on and put volunteers in many organisational policies. There are a safety net, and they give the structure and they protect both volunteers and the organisation, and they do set clear expectations. And seeing some of these are the core ones you would want to make sure that you've got. So safeguarding, anti-bullying harassment policy, equality, diversion, inclusion, confidentiality, data protection, code of conduct, or you may call it a behaviour policy, a volunteer problem-solving policy, and a whistleblowing policy. And it's best really to have a summary, a one-page summary of the processes and what the process is. So it'd be a policy with a bit of detail about what the process is linked to that particular policy itself. So making sure I say the processes themselves outside the policy are simple and clear to use. Next slide, please. So top tips. When you're trying to have an environment that ensures volunteers feel comfortable and feel safe to report things that have concerns and issues, and yet you have areas that you know how to deal with these, are create clear and accessible policies and procedures, build multiple safe reporting channels for volunteers, normalise that raising of concerns, that people feel that you've got a culture of openness and people feel safe. Ensure confidentiality and protection for your volunteers. Train leaders of volunteers and managers so they know how to handle issues well. Keep those procedures visible and repeat them, review them, make sure they're up to date still and relevant, and perhaps bring them in at different stages of the year with your volunteers, just to remind them that they are there, because they may not need them at this moment in time. You just don't know when an issue of concern may arise. But above all, lead by example. When leaders handle concerns openly, respectfully, and everybody else will too. And volunteers don't expect everything to run perfectly, but they do expect to be treated with respect, to be listened to, and see that their actions are taken when they raise concerns. And if we can provide all that, volunteers will stay engaged, teams will stay motivated, and organisations will thrive. Thank you for listening to me on my thoughts and insight about volunteering and safe places for raising concerns. I'm now going to pass you over to Catherine from Ramblers, who has lots more insight to share on her experiences as a resolution manager. So thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Victoria. That was really some helpful insight and certainly some things for me to take away in the role that I do. So I'm Catherine Haynes. I'm the Resolutions Manager at the Ramblers, and I'll just give you a brief overview of the Ramblers and what we do. I appreciate there's lots and lots and lots of you on the call, and it's lovely to virtually meet you. For those of you that want to know what I look like, I have got glasses. I'm also wearing a pink top, and I've also got brown hair. But I'm very different to Victoria. Next slide, please, Frankie. So who are we and what we do? So we are the Ramblers, and we're Britain's walk-in charity. So we've got 75 staff, we've got 106,000 members and 29,000 volunteers. The volunteers also do a number of roles, so there's around 41,000 roles that they do. So we open the way for everyone to enjoy the simple pleasures of walking. We step up to protect the places we love to wander. Our work helps keep the countryside open to all and to fight for the things that matter to most to walkers. So if ever you're on country walks and you see some paths, you might see a little Ramblers sign, and that's our volunteers that help keep those paths clear for you all to enjoy your walks. Next slide, please, Victor. Sorry, Frankie, even. So we've got over 500 walking groups across the country. We've got a network of volunteers that support groups as well as path maintenance to keep path network open and accessible. There's wellbeing walks, so first steps to healthier and happier lifestyle as well. We also get involved with Don't Lose Your Way, so saving all those lost paths. And we also have green routes, so every town and city can enjoy the benefits of walking in nature. Next slide, please. So my role, so like I said at the start, I'm the Resolutions Manager. I'm committed to giving our growing community of supporters the very best experience they can. My role is responsible for overseeing and managing resolution of complex issues and disputes. It also involves developing and implementing resolution strategies, ensuring compliance with policies and procedures at high standards of care. So its crucial role is as well as upholding the Ramblers' values and ensuring fairness and effectiveness. So that's my role as resolution manager. We've also got a team on the ground, so that's the member and supporter experience team, and they deal with more informal complaints. So there's a structure and policies and procedures. We've got a complaints policy. So we do always encourage that local resolution. So we've got a team there to deal with the low-level complaints, the issues, concerns at that level. More complex issues will come to me to look at. So process in key to successful complaint closure. So I'm the point of contact for complex complaints, ensuring clear and consistent communication with the complainant and also internal stakeholders, and encourage and support that local resolution. So I manage the end-to-end complaints process in line with the Ramblers complaints policy, ensuring timely, empathetic and effective resolution of the complaint, and also logged and track and manage complaints to ensure resolution is within set timeframes. I conduct investigations, gather information and evidence to support complaint resolution and implement solutions as well. Thank you. Next slide. So I'm just going to share with you a scenario that I've dealt with since I've been at the Ramblers, and it just demonstrates how a low-level concern, which local resolution, can quickly spiral into a more complex complaint, which then comes to me, which involves more of a formal investigation. Next slide, please. So the situation, a group member wasn't happy with the level of walks they weren't challenging enough. So the member also had concerns with safety on walks. So the group committee engaged with the member at the start, so that this was the local resolution. So that engagement was a questionnaire to all members of the group, you know, questioning their walks, whether they wanted more high-level walks or were they happy with the walks. So that there was that engagement at the start. So there was a start of that local resolution, but the member wasn't satisfied with a response from the committee. The questionnaire went out with the term complaint on it. So the committee did reference there's been a complaint made. And this is where I feel that things started to crumble slightly. The member wasn't satisfied with the response from the committee, and the committee felt the member was becoming increasingly critical of the group, and things became personal, and there was that bit of conflict that came in. And, you know, we're all human, and volunteers giving their time as well. So things became a bit heated when there was criticism of the group. So that local resolution started to crumble, and the member felt the committee were ignoring him, and then made an official complaint, which was 12 pages of numerous issues. Next slide, please. So the key themes of the complaint that came to me. So safety equipment on walks, unacceptable behaviour of the committee members. There was a reference to bullying, data protection, confidentiality, also social elements of the group. But in this 12-page complaint, there was no mention of the walks not being challenging enough, which was the original complaint. And this just demonstrates how things can quickly spiral and lots of things added on to the original complaint. Next slide, please. So what was my action? So communicate with both parties to acknowledge the complaint and make the committee aware of the complaint as well. So follow the complaint investigation process, which we've got internally at the Ramblers, and produce what's called a terms of reference document. And that just shows transparency. So everyone's aware of what the complaint is, what the issues are, and what's going to happen next, which is the next steps. And that is open communication. Arrange interviews with the complainant and the complainees. The key to success is getting the engagement in the actual process, and then writing a report and then sharing recommendations as well. So they're the actions that I take in that order. And I cannot emphasize enough how important timeframes are and setting those expectations from the very start and keeping that communication flowing, keeping the communication going. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges. So speaking to several volunteers involved quite a bit of time and timely updates to share with parties. So we have got a documented time frame within our Ramblers complaint process, and that it was challenging because of the amount of issues, concerns raised, and also the amount of volunteers that I needed to speak to as well. The issues raised were multifaceted, so I needed support from other teams at the Ramblers, which extended those interdependencies for the investigation process. Both parties had different interpretations of events, with a mindset of we are right and they are wrong. And both parties took issues very personally, which made some of the investigation meetings quite heated. And some of the volunteers were visibly upset by what had happened. And that can be hard, because also this is a process that volunteers are doing on a volunteer basis. They could have said, no, I'm not engaging with you. So you have to remember all the time that there is no criticism here. We're just here to support. Thank you. Next slide. So the outcome, the group committee engaged positively in the investigation process and understood and respected my role in the process. Throughout the process, I valued and understood that the committee were volunteers doing the best. And I know I said previously, but absolutely no criticism, take them on the journey. There were some key learnings, and the group committee acknowledged and agreed to the recommendations that were made. This was via a Zoom call with a number of committee members and myself, and there was an open dialogue around the rationale for the recommendations as well, because I think that's really important to give details of why I'm recommending these particular actions. The complainant initially was going to appeal one area of the outcome, but again, further clarity ensured acceptance. So part of the Ramblers complaint process is the appeal function. And by doing that, they felt heard. So there was a point they needed more clarity on. So I had further discussions with the committee and then went back with an understanding of what I thought the point was. I'm working through that. So it's about feeling heard too. Next slide, please. So what did those recommendations look like? So there was concerns around confidentiality and GDPR when dealing with complaints. So part of this was a committee member having a personal email address where committee information was sent to. So it's just some work around confidentiality and also talking to others about the complaint as well. So some work to do there. Support for the committee, top tips when initially receiving a complaint, what to do. Guidance around facilitating effective meetings and managing difficult interactions. So, set expectations at the start of a meeting so everyone is aware of what behaviours should be. Suggested revisiting e-learning, which is available on our Ramblers volunteer website, available to all volunteers about preventing and managing instances. So also guidance around language used in member communications, so there's a supportive tone. Both parties were reminded about the Ramblers values, communication to all members about the purpose of the group. All ideas welcome, but not everything is feasible, and that's okay. Interactions should be respectful and kind as well. Next slide, please. So key learnings for all of you on the call. Ensure that your organisation has a robust complaints procedure. This will help deal with complaints effectively and transparently, and train all staff. It's really important that all staff are aware of complaints procedures, policies and what to do. Complaints are a real opportunity to learn, make the most of them, to instigate change and listen carefully. Ask the complainant what they want to achieve. This might be possible, it might not, but it's worth asking, and manage expectations. I use video conferencing because it helps build connection, to see somebody, make it personal. Remain impartial. They're often very different interpretations, and there needs to be a balanced, unbiased approach to this. And never lose sight of the core values of your organisation. There are various sanctions options available, including expulsion within our volunteer and member investigation process. Next slide, please. So key learnings continued. Ensure that both the complainant and the complainee feel valued and heard. Empathy. Show you care. Walk in their shoes. Think about what if this had happened to you, and be kind. Collaboration, working together, a shared purpose and best practice. Be transparent, be accessible, how to contact you if there are any questions, concerns, and that accountability of continuous improvement. Next slide, please. So just some feedback from those involved. We're keen to reach a conclusion to this as we can carry on doing what we are good at and running a very successful club, and look forward to celebrating our 40th anniversary. Many thanks for today's meeting. I hope it helped towards solving the issue. It's no problem. I appreciate that you're being thorough. I cannot stress enough that I recognise the committee spend a lot of their own time, and I'm very appreciative of this. I've repeatedly thanked them personally for this. Thank you. Next slide. And just finally, it's not about agreeing with everything someone says. It's about showing them you value their perspective. Conflict is manageable and hard moments feel lighter when they know they've been heard. Thank you. Like I said, any questions you can pop in the chat, and I'll just pass you over to Steve now, Steve Naylor, who's CEO of Bucks Vision. Thanks, Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. Welcome, everybody. I'm Steve Naylor. I'm the Chief Executive of Bucks Vision. I've been Chief Executive now for 10 years. I'm white, male, pale, stale, with a pale blue shirt and glasses. And I've got a face for radio. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are much smaller than the Ramblers. We're a small charity supporting people with sensory loss across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. Although we are much smaller than the Ramblers, you will see that there are some underlying themes with what I'm going to cover, and what Catherine spoke about and what Victoria touched upon earlier. Just to give you an idea of scale, we've got 16 members of staff, about 230 volunteers, and our turnover is about 700k. We're very positive about volunteering. We've got a full-time manager and coordinator in post supporting volunteers. We've got what we think is an open and supportive culture. We're a small charity, it's very flat with clear communication lines. And we're very positive about volunteering. We couldn't help our beneficiaries without the volunteers doing fantastic work across all of our geographical area. And we've got clear volunteering policies and procedures in place. But I'm going to talk about an issue that happened quite a few years ago, but some of the learning that came out of that and might be useful for some of you on the call. Next slide, please. So the first thing is, I'm sure, like you, we prefer to resolve any issues around volunteers informally. And that applies, to be honest, the significant majority of circumstances, we do resolve issues informally. We try to tackle issues before they escalate. Sometimes it is a tricky balance. Our volunteers have got quite a lot of autonomy, and it's about giving volunteers the freedom to do what they need to do, but at the same time, exerting a level of control to make sure that all of your services are being delivered according to your charity's standards and requirements. We communicate regularly with our volunteers, we attend meetings regularly. Some of the issues that we come across seem to be through the grapevine communications, is how I would describe it. A volunteer said X about Y, or there's been a complaint about Z. And getting clarity on that sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. One of the things I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about an issue with a volunteer who was also a beneficiary or member of our service, which added a certain level of complexity to dealing with the issue. And what I'm going to focus on is when you might need to carry out a formal investigation and the value of that investigation. You'll see that the outcome of this formal investigation is different to the outcome of Catherine's scenario, and that outcome would have been different if we hadn't done the formal investigation, as you'll discover as we move on to the next slide. So as I said, this happened several years ago. People are no longer involved with the charity. It was a really, really passionate volunteer. She'd been with the charity many years. She had lived experience of sensory loss. She was a beneficiary of the charity. She was very passionate about what she wanted to do, but there were issues occasionally with the fact that that wasn't necessarily in line with all of the core services that we were focusing on. And the other issue that we had was that she was quite negative occasionally about the charity, which was a bit peculiar, bearing in mind the fact that she'd been with the charity a long, long time. Part of the problem was that some of her grievances were historical, that went back many, many years, way before I started, right? And I've been here 10 years now. So one of the problems that we had to manage was that volunteers have very long memories, and some of you on the call may have discovered that already. Next slide, please. One of the things that we came across with this particular volunteer was, although she was really fantastic and passionate, she had a habit of sending emails that were quite abrasive and rude. And that affected both the morale of staff here, bearing in mind we've got a small staff team, and also volunteers that were working alongside them. We had suggested that we needed to make changes to a particular project, and that resulted in the volunteer sending quite a hurtful email to a member of staff here, and also was very vocal about the volunteers that she worked with. And there was an implication that that she had been bullied, potentially with a sort of racial element, and she resigned as a volunteer. Next slide, please. So that was upsetting to both staff and volunteers. We accepted their resignation, and we could have drawn a line under it, and that would be the end of the matter. but we chose not to do that. We felt that we couldn't ignore the accusation, which we thought was very serious. Catherine mentioned bullying in her scenario. This also been mentioned specifically against a member of staff. And we felt that that was so serious, especially with the potential element of racial bias, that we wanted to carry out a formal investigation. Something that you're unlikely to want to rush to do if you're a small charity, because essentially what it means you're likely to do is to nominate a trustee who has to be appropriately selected and a member of staff to investigate. So we set up the investigation, we carried out the investigation, and the staff member who had been accused of wrongdoing was subsequently completely cleared. And we had a full set of notes, including some useful learning outcomes for us as a charity. Next slide, please. I think the first thing to say is that whilst we would always look to resolve problems informally, and I'm sure you would too, there are times when a formal investigation is really valuable, even though it's time consuming, even though it can be very difficult. There are expectations on both sides in terms of what we provide to our volunteers, but also the behaviour that we expect of volunteers. We've got all of the policies in place that Victoria mentioned earlier. I think that one of the things that we've discovered is that it's difficult to over-communicate with volunteers. Part of the problem with the issue that we investigated was there had been warning signs previously that we had ignored because we wanted to give the volunteer the benefit of the doubt. Clearly, they were having a very difficult day. Next slide, please. And I think that the underlying issue which came out subsequently was that the volunteer had mental health issues. This was pre-COVID. Mental health really wasn't part of the conversation. And I think that one of the really positive changes about COVID and post-COVID is that we're much more open about mental health now. And we talk about mental health all the time as a charity with both our staff and volunteers. One of the valuable things that came out of the investigation was we were very clear in terms of what we could have done better, but also where the boundaries have been breached in terms of volunteer behaviour. And I'm not sure that I appreciated really the impact on the morale of other volunteers. And so subsequent to that happening, the formal investigation being concluded, the volunteer actually apologised and asked to return, and we declined to have them back, largely as a result of a lot of the information that came out of the formal investigation. Next slide, please. So, what I would say is that whilst it's something that you won't want to rush to do, there is real value in carrying out a formal investigation when you need to, because you will then end up with a written document that is likely to have some valuable learning both for you as a charity, but also around the general way that volunteers are being supported and the importance of open communication and tackling issues early before they escalate into large issues. That's me.
Thanks, Steve. We're now going to move to the Q&A part of the session. So if you haven't already done it, please do use the Q&A function to pop your questions in. You'll find it at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you haven't found it already, I can see there are already some questions in there. You can also upvote questions that others have asked. If there's one you would particularly like heard, then please do upvote, and that will help us try and prioritise the more popular ones. I will try and get through as many as possible, but I am conscious we are trying to stick to time. So if we don't answer your question, we will try and answer it in the follow-up email. So just over to the questions. The first question that we've got is for Catherine. Do you have any advice to when a volunteer gives feedback, but the concerns they have are something that is out of your hands? So For example, it might be a change of policy, perhaps due to decision by senior management, or a change of the ways that you work due to changes in how the charity is run.
I mean, what I would say with that is that all feedback is valuable, and that volunteer has obviously felt that they needed to feed something back. So it's ensuring that that volunteer has got a response to say, thank you for taking the time. On occasion, yes, you might need to seek support from somebody else. And hopefully when there is policy concerns or there's changes, they're communicated to the volunteers with some caveat of why this is happening. What I would do is seek some support from a colleague, and to say, look, this is what we've had, and just get their steer on that. So yes, I can, in my role, I can answer everything. I haven't got the knowledge or the experience to do that, but there's always somebody that can. And yes, with regards to the response, it might not be something that the volunteer wants to hear, but even thanking them, you know, we value your feedback. I'll ensure that it's passed to the relevant person. You know, all our policies at Ramblers are reviewed, and they have got review dates on those policies. So quite often, you know, that will be fed back into our next review. That can be helpful, but it's always about volunteer feeling heard, feeling valued, and a response to whether that's thanks for the feedback, I'll ensure it's passed on, or if there is more of a detailed response from the person that you're passing it on to, then give that response to the volunteer. Has that helped at all? Hopefully.
Catherine. So a question for Victoria, just leading on for that, just around sort of building relationships. Do you have any advice for conducting the informal check-ins when you've got a really large team of volunteers, especially when those volunteers are primarily managed or supervised by other staff in different teams?
Yes, thank you, Frankie. For me, it comes about that everybody's responsible and everybody needs to understand the responsibilities within the organisation. So it's not just reliant on one or two people in the organisation. Everyone understands how to do that. So if they've got leaders that are more in the community or have other people, they need to be trained and experienced in what they're supposed to do and how to deal with it. So understanding what the process is, so that's really clear for them. So when they're doing those check-ins themselves, they're able to deal with any concerns that arise and just have open conversations with individuals. So yes, for me, it's ensuring that everybody in the organisation, that we have a culture of volunteering here, that we understand how we support volunteers, what the processes are, and how to deal with complaints. So making sure everyone can do it. Because it won't necessarily, it could be anybody that notices an issue, or somebody won't necessarily know who to come to, and might come to you who's sitting at a desk in an administration role that doesn't normally have contact with volunteers. It's knowing what to do and how to deal with it.
Thanks, Victoria. We've got quite a few questions around policies. So our next question is, what should go into a volunteer problem-solving policy? And is it more aimed at volunteers, managers, or both? And that's for you, Victoria.
Yeah, just checking about that. That's fine, Frankie. Thank you. What should go in a volunteer process? It's just about this sort of the process, mainly about what is going to happen. So what is acceptable, what's not acceptable behaviour, and also what will happen. So if they want to make a formal complaint, who would be dealing with it, what this process is basically, and everybody should have a copy of that and understand what the process is. And as I think you've dropped into the chat, there is a framework, isn't there? There's a template from the NCVO that will give you some really good starting points for that. And it is for volunteer policy, not for staff. Or staff tend to go down a grievancy policy. There are very particular legal requirements. A volunteer policy is not the same, but you still treat your volunteers with dignity, respect, and duty of care to support them. So you might have similar processes that they can appeal to things, that they have people to speak to, that you might give them timescales for all that. But keeping it simple, because not every organisation has a lot of people in their organisations to do this. So I think the important part is to make sure that the process is simple, clear, and accessible to everyone. It doesn't have to be complicated at all.
Thank you. And then just following on from that, do charities have separate policies for staff and volunteers on sort of like their behaviour, bullying and harassment, or is it like one umbrella policy with separate procedures?
It can be both, actually. I'm thinking there's some that are very clearly defined as volunteer only policies, and some are where you would have a overarching policy, but the procedure might be slightly different to ensure that they are treated as volunteers and not like employees. So that's where it gets complicated in the sense you need to decide that as your organisation. Having lots of policies in your organisation is hard to manage. You've got to review them, you've got to keep them updated, you've got to keep everybody informed. So streamlining and keeping, down to the number of volunteer policies you have separately is important. Does that sound rather complex? But just making sure that's right for your organisation. You don't have complex policies. So you may have an overarching policy with slightly different procedures, but there are some key ones that you need to keep separate, which I'd say would be the problem-solving one. But things like safeguarding, EDI, as I said earlier on, they don't have legal rights, but we need to ensure that we're treating them fairly, same as employees.
Thank you.
And we do volunteer training on law as well.
I was going to say we do. Thank you for that plug there. Just a question for Catherine. How do you handle situations when people don't want to engage with your process or policy?
Be honest, I've never had that situation. But what I would say is how you first introduce it. That is so crucial at the start, and it's about valuing their time, valuing their interpretation. There's two sides. So this has come to light. Do you have some time so we can talk through it? And that is setting the scene right from the start, and that's so crucial and so important. So the communication isn't accusatory. It's not, this is what's happened, and I need to meet with you about this. It's about that interpretation. Please, can we have a catch up? So you can give me your side of events, and then we can discuss next steps. Because it's all about being supportive. And it's crucial that the messaging right from the start has that supportive tone.
Thank you. And another question for you, Catherine, is how do you decide when to commence a formal investigation? And do you have any advice on kind of getting started with that?
Yeah, so we've got a formal investigation investigation process. So first things first is to assess, the seriousness of what's come in. Our policy works alongside our safeguarding policy, our whistleblowing policy, our volunteering policy, health and safety policy. So it's all these things. And like I said in my presentation, my role is more to do with complex issues, concerns. So perhaps the group have tried to resolve something, but it's escalated, and there's nothing more that they feel they can do with this situation. So I've got a manager, so it would be, terms of reference, so pulling that together, discussing with my manager, this has come to light. So things that come to me, for example, it's, sexual discrimination, for example, conflict within groups, behavior issues, concerns, racial discrimination as well. So these are classed as serious issues. But like I said, our investigation process does document this as well. But it's not me working alone. It's working with colleagues as well around this. And like I said, it's all about communication, getting that tone right at the start. And volunteers don't have to engage in the process, but it's also understanding why they wouldn't want to engage in the process as well. I hope that's helpful. Thanks.
That's really good. Thank you. A question for Steve. How did you communicate to your volunteer that you weren't prepared to have them back, and how was that received?
Thank you. That's a good question. I think the first thing is to say that, as I touched upon in my presentation, although the volunteer had complained and resigned, they had not asked for a formal investigation to be carried out. We carried out one anyway and informed them that we were doing that. and they were interviewed as part of the investigation process by a trustee and investigating member of staff, and kept informed of progress throughout the investigation, with the result of the investigation being shared with them. So essentially, by the time that that had been completed, it was sort of fairly clear where we stood, and it was very useful, a very useful reference document to confirm that we wouldn't be taking them back. And we basically said that we acknowledged that as a charity we'd not done everything right, but that their behaviour had been unacceptable and had upset both other volunteers and members of staff, and we weren't prepared to take them back.
Thank you. Just following on from that, and it's probably a question for either Catherine, Victoria, or Steve. What support have you provided for volunteers around mental health and well-being? I don't know.
I was going to say, for me, I suppose one of the questions, it really depends on whether they have no mental health issues when they come to you as an organisation. You're there up front and you understand that, compared to identifying people's behaviours and deciding independently whether that person has mental health issues informally. I think that's where the difficulty arises. So somebody is up front, and when you interview them, they say that they have a mental health issue, and they, etc. You can offer them the support that they need for that particular issue. If they haven't, but they're displaying types of behaviour that indicates that, then you're in a bit of a more difficult area, because you can't make assumptions about people. So for me, it would be having a conversation with somebody and talking them and signposting, helping them and understanding what the issues may be. But it is a challenge when people's behaviour changes while you're volunteering, when they're volunteering, which can often happen. And managing that and understanding what the complexities of their health issues are, mental health issues are, and it's seeking advice and support and other organisations but for them to admit it and tell you that is the biggest challenge of all, I would have said. But Catherine and Steve might have different experiences.
Thanks, Victoria. I'll just check whether Catherine or Steve want to jump in before I move to... Oh, Catherine?
Sorry, yeah, I'll come in there. I mean, we're fortunate at Ramblers, we have got a safeguarding lead as well, so I would reach out to our safeguarding lead if there were concerns about somebody's mental health, for example. We have got our policy and procedure in place as well. But whoever asked that question, completely right, there is more that organisations, charities can do in relation to this. You know, one thing I do when I'm following through an investigation is to check in, is everything okay, and building that relationship up. So if somebody was struggling, they'd be open about that to me, and then I would onwardly seek some support for them if needed. It has happened, but there is support mechanisms in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Just moving on to another question that's around inductions. Victoria, probably one for you. The question is around how would you effectively and sensitively handle a bad reference for a new potential volunteer, where the referee has raised concerns around the suitability of the volunteer? How would you broach that with the volunteer whilst maintaining confidentiality and, of course, respecting the volunteer?
Thank you. That is an interesting one. I think in the past, I was probably quite an interesting one. I'm thinking about how I would handle that. I think I most probably would have a conversation with the volunteer about their repeat, depending on what the person was saying, really, and just broach it with them confidentiality wise and say there have been concerns raised about these issues. It's a bit of a vague sort of commentary about what the issues may be, but I think I would actually have a conversation with the volunteer. I might want to dig a little bit further and maybe suggest another reference if I felt that I needed to further investigate. If it did seem to be continuous and a problem about the reference, I might do a little trial period with them as a volunteer to see whether these issues were going to come to light, because I'd be aware of them. So it depends how serious the issue was. If I didn't think they were suitable for the role, I wouldn't take them on as a volunteer. But I think that just relying on one reference that didn't come back very well from somebody wouldn't be enough for me to turn that volunteer away at that particular time. I think digging a little bit deeper, finding a little bit more, having conversation, as I say, possibly looking at other elements, getting another reference, a DBS check, and then maybe just trial them out and see how it went and if I'm aware of their issues. But let's be honest and say, let's try this, how it works, give you a little bit of a trial period.
Thank you, Victoria. That's really helpful. Question for Catherine. So I'm interested to hear how other charities handle appeals to decision making. So for instance, do you facilitate appeals for any reason or only if there is an alleged flaw in the process?
It's
and would you match that to your employee disciplinary process?
ours is separate, so ours comes under the volunteer member investigation process, and the appeal goes to chief of people. They've got 7 days to appeal, and it's the process. It's that they can reference a particular area that they'd like to appeal, and it's down to the process. So there's no new information that's given on that. It has to be down to the process. I've got it up here. Sorry, I'm just reading. Appeal. So right to appeal is limited to the outcome of the investigation or the process, and the investigation will not be rerun. So that's crucial, that it's not going to be a re-investigation. And then chief of people will then review the investigation, the report, recommendations, and take it from there.
Thank you. Question again for Catherine. How would you manage when a complaint comes through that doesn't need to be investigated, but the complainant is persistent and ignoring informal routes?
Just having that conversation with that person. They obviously feel strongly that it should be investigated. You know, organisations have got their own policies and procedures, and it's about fairness and transparency. So you can't suddenly start investigating something which doesn't fall into the policy and procedure. And that's a term I do use quite often. It's about fairness and transparency to everyone that gets in touch and in contact, and it's explaining the reasons why, but also listening to them why they think it should be investigated, because that volunteer member, whoever, keeps asking that question because they feel that they either haven't been heard or the answer isn't what they were expecting. So it's getting to the bottom of that. But also, like I said, is sticking to your processes and procedures, because they're there for a reason. And if we all start to go off piste, then we're going to be in a bit of hot water. If then you get somebody coming to you, oh, well, I know that so-and-so had this looked at. Why are you saying no to me? So it's fairness, transparency all the time.
Thank you. And just in terms of your process, how do you establish an adequate time frame in which complaints or conflicts are to be resolved? Is it based off of sort of the severity of the complaint or the time in which it's received, or is it a bit of both?
So, question for me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. So it's with us, it's 4 weeks, and on occasion it does go over that time frame, but I will ensure that if it is over that time frame, that all those involved are communicated to and the reasons why, because some cases are complex and they need a lot of interviews, a lot of investigation time, and it's being honest and transparent right from the start to say that yes, our publicised time frame is X, but I do need to speak to various people, so it's likely to take longer. So it's setting the expectation right from the start.
Thank you. Victoria, some questions for you. How would you suggest trying to deal with volunteer behaviour or concerns before they become a bigger complaint issue?
So, Frank, what was the first part of the question?
How would you suggest someone tries to deal with volunteer behaviour or concerns before they become a bigger complaint issue?
Oh, very much so. We don't want the issues escalating. And I think it is about speaking to that individual and taking time out, whether that is something you can see to them face to face or whether to do it virtually, is to refer back, depending on the behaviour, when they joined it in an organisation, they would have seen the code of behaviour or code of conduct, whatever it is that you have got in place. And again, using that as a starting point to discuss behaviours and what is acceptable and not acceptable in the organisation. They may not realise that they are just going off, particularly at the early stages. So it's really good to use that and reinforcing what the expectations are of the organisation's values and the culture of the organisation. So when you recruit volunteers, that should be right at the beginning, induction, and then reinforced in various different ways. So if somebody's behaviour is beginning to come out of line with your ethos and as an organisation, is to refer back to that. That's why it's a really good tool saying, these are things we expect. We do feel perhaps, or you would have you noticed that you feel that you're not doing these? Are there issues or concerns you may have? How can we support you? So you're using it in a positive way rather than hitting somebody over the head with it, if you like, and saying you're not behaving the way we want you to. It's just that this is what we expect of volunteers to do, have an open conversation, and then they go, oh, I didn't realise I'd moved into behaviour like that. Or it may be then moving it to the next stage, but that's a really good starting point as far as I can say.
Thank you. And I think we've probably all experienced this one, but how would you navigate complaints or feedback that have come to you sort of via the grapevine, so not from the person who's actually complaining? Is there a way, like, would you go back to the source, or should you wait for them to come to you? What would you suggest in that situation, Victoria?
I think it is important when something comes to you that you record it. And this is about this where you can record information, because you can get patterns. It isn't necessarily you're an investigator or take it, because actually if it's come third hand, it's very difficult to know. So if it perhaps anonymous even, well, when you're dealing with those sort of things, it's just important to record them down somewhere so you've got it back, and you can create like a register of things. And think most probably someone like Alzheimer's Society, you might have something already like a risk register type thing. So then you'd identify patterns that are happening, and then you can address them. So something to do with the grapevine, it's difficult to directly find out. You can speak to people, but for me, I think it's about recording that information and just finding a pattern. But if you're in tune with your volunteers and listening to your volunteers, it shouldn't be coming through the grapevine. They should start being confident to come to you directly in the first place and speak about their concerns.
Thank you. And actually, just following on from that, do you have any sort of tips for how or when volunteer complaints are or should be recorded? Is it every instance, or yeah, could you give some steer on that one?
I think it's good practice, as I say, to record every incident of concern, even as I say, it's just a note somewhere in a very confidential and professional place that is secure, but just to see what's happening. You know, you might find that there's been lots of issues in a particular service, there may be a particular individual, or there's been sort of rumours and conversations. So when you talk to somebody, you've got some more evidence to support that, because anything like it's a risk assessment, what you're doing is identifying common things that are happening and how you can actually resolve them. So I think that you do record everything that comes up that you think are serious enough to record. It depends on your organisation, but I say you start forming patterns, you start becoming aware what's happening before they escalate.
Thank you. We've probably got time for maybe one or two more questions. So one of the questions again for you, Victoria, is how would you deal with concerns about a volunteer due, for example, to their perhaps mental health or dementia? Reasonable adjustments had been made, but the volunteer role is probably no longer suitable for that individual. Do you have any advice on sort of handling complaints that turn out to be around sort of capability issues and how to end that volunteering well?
It is difficult to have a conversation when someone leaves, but as Steve says, it does happen a lot in organisation and sometimes appropriate. So it's about ending that relationship positively well. So sitting down and having a conversation with an individual, explaining to them why that role no longer is suitable for them. And there's also talking about other alternative roles. Maybe that person could continue to be a volunteer for you, but taking on a different capacity in that role. Maybe they are not able to do this, but they can do something else. So how do you keep them engaged with the organisation? They could also continue to be a different type of supporter. If they're no longer to volunteer for you, you can offer them to be still engaged with the organisation, thinking about keeping them engaged with newsletters. They could help you with in future fundraising, or maybe the donation later on, or something like that. So by keeping them engaged in the organisation, even though they're no longer able to do that original opportunity is a really positive thing, because they'll go away thinking that was a great organisation to volunteer for, and they will spread that word to other people as well. So for me, it is about, if they are no longer to continue to be able to do that role, offering them an alternative role where possible. If you are no longer having to have that conflict, they no longer be able to volunteer for you, is sit down, have a conversation, be clear the reasons why, and also it's just ending in a good way with a good conversation. Again, we cover a lot of that in ending volunteering and conversations, well, training too.
Thank you, Victoria. So that's probably all we've got time for on the questions. We will, like I say, any we haven't answered, we will try and answer and send out with the follow-up as well. So next slide, please. Before we signpost you to further tools and resources, any second now, a snap poll should appear on your screens, just to get your initial thoughts on how you found today's webinar. And if you can spare a few minutes, there will also be a short feedback form appearing in your browser when you leave today's webinar. We would love to know what you enjoyed or valued and where we could make improvements for future sessions. So just going to leave you to do that quick feedback poll quickly, and then I will signpost you just to some further resources that you might find helpful as you navigate handling concerns and complaints. Next slide, please. So this slide just highlights some of the key NCBO resources that can support you after today's webinar. So we've got some links under our help and guidance, and these are resources that were mentioned throughout the session. They cover the basics every organisation should have in place to creating a safe environment, and they set clear expectations on both sides. So this includes things like writing role descriptions, having that volunteer policy and putting agreements in place. They aren't legal contracts, but they just give everyone that good clarity from the start. There's also practical guidance on things like running inductions and safeguarding volunteers. And importantly for today's theme, there's resources on solving problems, having challenging conversations, and ending volunteering well. These can just make handling concerns and complaints much easier because you'll already have that framework in place. Under the training and events, you'll see more opportunities to build your skills. So these include sessions on volunteering and the law, good practice in volunteer management, a new course on developing a volunteer strategy, and a session on managing conflict and ending volunteering well. These can help you feel more confident in dealing with issues when they come up. I do really want to draw your attention in particular to the course on managing conflict and ending volunteering well, as that is with today's speaker, Victoria. I have attended the session and I found it really valuable. So when you attend that session, by the end of the training, you'll have identified common sources of conflict in volunteer programs, recognize the impact of unresolved conflict on morale and productivity, understood how to apply effective conflict resolution strategies to address disputes constructively, evaluated problem-solving processes and how to implement them within your volunteer program, considered ways to succession plan for volunteering roles, and learned how to implement good practice in ending volunteering well. It's a really useful session and will help build directly on some of the themes that we've covered today. Also, don't forget about our small charity help desk, where you can come through to myself or Amy or our colleague Andrea. You can phone Monday to Friday between 10 and 4 p.m. or email at any time. Please note that the help desk can't get involved in disputes, but we can point you to the right guidance and signpost to further support. So whether you want to read the guidance in your own time, attend training, or speak to one of us on the help desk, there are plenty of resources available to help you strengthen how you involve and support your volunteers. Next slide, please. To finish up, I just want to highlight a couple of upcoming free webinars that might be of interest to you. The next one coming up is on registering a charity in England and Wales. It will run on the 30th of October from 2 until 3:30. And the session is ideal if you're thinking of setting up, if you're a small charity nearing the registration threshold, or if you're considering changes to your legal structure. You'll learn what will make an organisation eligible for charity registration and get a clear overview of the steps involved. It will be chaired by my colleague Amy, and we'll be joined by expert speakers Aggie Taylor from our governance consultancy team, Stuart Wood, Head of Registration at the Charity Commission, and you'll also hear from a charity that's been through the process and can share their experiences. The second webinar is going to be part of Trustees Week, hosted in partnership with the Media Trust, and it's focused on AI and what it means for trustees and the essentials. It will be a really engaging session exploring useful AI tools, the risks and opportunities, and real lessons learned from an NCVO member already using AI. Both webinars are free to attend. You can book your place through the QR code on the screen or by visiting our website. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Just a few final things before we wrap up. First, a huge thank you to our speakers, to Victoria, to Catherine and to Steve for generously sharing their insights and experiences with us. And of course, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us and contributing your thoughts and questions throughout the session. Before you go, again, as I said, we would really, really appreciate it if you could fill out that short Zoom survey that will pop up when the webinar ends. It should only take a minute and it will really help us to improve things for future sessions. We will be sharing, as I said, the recording and the slides again, and any questions that weren't answered, we will try and answer them and send them out for you. Finally, if you're not already a member of NCVO, I would really encourage you to take a look at the benefits that you can get from joining. You can scan the QR code that is on the screen now, or you can visit our website to find out more and sign up. So thank you so much to everyone for being a part of this session. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful, and we hope to see you at another event soon.